Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry, that was not what I was expecting. Good morning. Okay, there we are. I'm Katie Dellinger. I'm the farm business editor at DTN Progressive Farmer. I'm really excited to introduce our speaker today. He was one of my early career influences when I was traveling to Washington, D.C. to cover the lockups. I met Alan Bjerga working in those rooms, and he helped show me the city. We got in a little trouble. It was a lot of fun, but I learned a lot about how to report on ag politics issues from watching Alan do his job. Alan Bjerga serves as the Executive Vice President of Communications and Industry Relations, leading the National Milk Producers Federation's communication efforts with a focus on digital storytelling, media relations, and marketing, while expanding outreach to its members and the broader dairy industry. They're having fun. He's the author of National Milk Producer Federation's Dairy Defined Thought Leadership Series and its podcast of the same name. Alan has also written a book during his time at Bloomberg, Endless Appetites, which still sits on my shelf. But there are a lot more fun facts about Alan. He is a former contestant on Jeopardy! He sings a mean amount of karaoke, and as I found out recently, he is considered an athlete by his neighbors. He can tell you more about that. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Alan Bjerga to talk more about SEO, GEO, and the truth.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Katie, and thank you so much for being here. And this is the first time I've been at this conference. The programming seems incredibly informative. I've been warned in advance that a good number of you might walk out on me halfway through my presentation. It's just because of the schedule for everything else, so that's a good forewarning to have in advance. And frankly, taking a look at the programming that you've been having the last couple days, I'm a little bit intimidated in terms of trying to talk to you about SEO, GEO, and the truth. This GEO is a term that wasn't really in currency even 2-3 years ago. SEO has been around for a bit longer, and it looks like you've been getting a fair amount of discussion of AI and social media and writing techniques, and all of these things will be moving along. And I don't know how much I really have to add on these particular topics, and I don't know how much this presentation is going to focus on some of the meat and potatoes of what you might be wanting to hear. I mean, it's there, right? I'm talking about SEO. As someone who has sat through a lot of these type of presentations at conferences and such, I get skeptical sometimes of people who sort of tell you this is the solution, this is how you do it. Often those people are trying to sell you something, and I have nothing to sell you. And even if they do know, and these are helpful techniques, in 6 months it's going to be something else. This is an incredibly fast-paced, fast-moving environment. This is a challenge I face at Georgetown University, where I teach a business writing and communications course, and have been doing it for 12 years, revamping it to keep it fresh every time with a new generation of students who bring different perspectives. At this point, it's been about a half a generation, and I've seen those changes. So what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about with SEO, GEO, and the truth. My emphasis is probably a little bit on that third part, because I think in the end it's what we're most concerned about regardless of the context. Whether you're a journalist, which I was for 20 years, or if you're in communications, which I've been doing for almost 7 years now. This is something that, whatever your perspective is, it's something that is important for you as you represent who you're representing, and try to make sure that their point of view or the investigations that you do are fairly accurately communicated in the global marketplace, where there are a lot of competing voices and everyone is fighting for clicks and eyeballs and attention. So these are things that I'm thinking about going into this. Before I start moving the slides along, as I was preparing for this, it's going to sound like I was cramming, and I really wasn't. But I had the opportunity on my flight here, which was kind of grueling yesterday. I work in the Washington, D.C. area, connected in Atlanta, came here. Both of the flights were late. It was soup in Maryland when I left. It is soup here when I arrive. Welcome to the dog days of summer. But I thought that this would be an appropriate time for me to finally read a book that's been sitting on my desk for several months. It's called Generation AI, Why Generation Alpha and the Age of AI Will Change Everything. And I'm not sharing it with you as a recommendation to read this book. It wasn't a bad book. It kind of reminded me of my book. Like, some guy got a contract to write a book, and it was pretty good, but the thesis was starting to evolve, and the deadline was approaching, and he sort of, about 2/3 of the way, lost the plot. If you ever want to read a copy of Endless Appetites, I'll tell you which chapters you can skip, because it's a common phenomenon. But I envied this guy, him writing his book as opposed to the book that I wrote, which is in 2011, because he had Grammarly, and he had tools that could actually go over his work and give some of the editing skill that, I tell you, when the publishing industry was falling apart, I was not getting. But I was also struck by the fact that I'm sitting here learning about AI and all these things that prompts can do, and about how the world is so interactive, and yet this is a book. It's a book. See this? This is a book. This is printed on paper. You interact with it by reading and thinking, but if you ask it a question, the words don't change, folks. It's a book. Now, I can look at this book and I can say something like, okay, book, tell me everything that you have to say about Google and AI. Is it going to answer me? Actually, yes, it is, folks. Especially those of you who are younger, there's this thing called an index. And the index will tell you, it talks about Google and AI. You just have to go look at it in 2.8. My point on that is that nothing is new under the sun. And this is something we have to remember as we go into the AI world, because it is intimidating. It is intimidating for you. It is intimidating for me. It is intimidating for everyone with a liberal arts degree, because we don't know how useful we're going to be, and we don't know how we're going to interact with this. And the people who are the experts, they don't know either. We are all looking through a glass darkly, as written by the Apostle Paul 2,000 years ago. Nothing is new under the sun, but we're all dealing with some incredibly new things that are changing. So let's talk a little bit about the world we're living in right now, okay, as communicators of SEO and GEO and the truth, all right? So as we all know, this is not your father's communication environment or even your grown children's. One of the things that has struck me in the last couple of years working for the National Milk Producers Federation is, one, the fewer number of press calls that I get, and two, when I get those press calls, how little they matter. And that sounds depressing, especially if you're one of those people making the press calls. But the fact is, the New York Times will call and my CEO doesn't care. And 5 years ago, it was all hands on deck and prestige. We had the elite of earned media. And now it's a voice. And there's a lot of voices out there, and if you're trying to get your message across, it's not necessarily to legacy media, right? We had an election in 2024. It was called the influencers election. Like, entire ecosystems of people who are trusted by younger audiences have come out to create content, and that is now the competition. It's a competition which a consumer, we in America have been able to choose from many kinds of soap for several generations. Why can't we choose our reality? Right? We're in a choose-your-own-adventure world. The only thing we can't seem to choose yet is aging. I think aging is completely un-American. No matter what I do, I get up in the morning, I am one day older. But I know that we have people who are working on that, and I have no doubt that we'll have a mediated reality in that soon enough as well, perhaps with an avatar. AI would like to choose the realities for people. I just show this one just because of my nostalgia. I left newspapers in 2005. When I was the reporter of the Wichita Eagle. Some people in the audience, Chris Clayton remembers those days. That was newsroom employment at that time, 75,000. By 22, it was 31,000. I was looking at the leading print circulation newspapers in America the other day. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune, now the Minnesota Star-Tribune, which everyone that I was with at the Minnesota Daily, we all aspired to work there. It is now up to the 7th largest print circulation newspaper in America. That's because apparently people on the Northern Plains still like printed products. Maybe it keeps them warm in the winter. But what struck me about that print circulation was that the daily circulation of the Minnesota Star-Tribune, which is the 7th largest print circulation newspaper in America, is about the same circulation as the Wichita Eagle was when I worked there 25 years ago. Okay, and we can talk about eyeballs and we can talk about clicks and online, but it doesn't pay the bills the same way. Okay, so there's still a wide reach. Legacy media still has its place. It's still important as original source information, and it's well regarded by the large language models, which we'll get to later. This presentation will not be bereft of hope, just so you know. But in its place, we have our cacophony, right? 69% of Americans say that they are savvy enough to spot misinformation. This is from some research that Ketchum has done, commissioned by the Dairy Checkoff. 80% say they've fallen for or shared fake news at least once. So let's talk about some cognitive dissonance there. 51% of Gen Z say they turn to social media as a news source daily. I actually find that number kind of low. 71% of Americans find news online surpassing TV. Here's a stat that I don't have this on this slide. It's been a different presentation that I just want to slow. It's affected everything, right? We've cut the cord. We're not doing cable streaming anymore. What do you think is the average age of a viewer of MTV on cable? Question, how old am I? I have been, basically, the average age of an MTV viewer has been my age since I was 15. It just keeps going up and up and up. 52, okay? Because that's how you're consuming. Now, once again, is it packaged? Does it go someplace else? These are key questions. Wither and wither truth, okay? This is a charting of political bias of publications. People believe people who are like themselves, again, explaining the influencers. People believe people who tell it like it is. Usually that means what I think, but more entertaining and forceful, right? Also, people believe absolute BS. And that includes you. My in-laws live in Poland. My wife is from Krakow, Poland. And if you're ever in Poznan, Poland, go to the Museum of the Potato, okay? Potatoes are a very big deal in Poland. But in the 1950s, there was a blight that was introduced that was devastating potato crops. And the Soviets, who were basically running the nation's agriculture, couldn't figure it out, and they couldn't keep it under control. So not able to control it, they did the next best thing. They found a scapegoat. And there were public education programs about how the CIA had dropped the blight from airplanes over Poland to destroy Polish agriculture. And I was reading about this in this museum, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And my brother-in-law, my wife's brother, said that, oh, you mean that wasn't true? I saw that movie when I was in elementary school. Part of my family, he spent his entire life believing that Poland couldn't grow potatoes because the CIA was dropping a blight from airplanes. Maybe. What's our context? What do we believe? Because it's just told to us and we never really questioned it. Maybe it was from an authoritative source we didn't know. This is the world that we're dealing with. Someone is going to be paid very well to create that reality for you. And we're seeing it all the time. So what are we going to do, right? We're living in an SEO world, okay? While search engine optimization has been with us as long as there have been search engines for content creators, it's been top of mind for 15 to 20 years, guiding how accessible our work is online. How big of a deal is SEO in your organizations? How much do you talk about it? A little bit, never, a lot, constant, obsessively? What would you say? For us, it's mainly a conversation we have with our web developer, right? They're adding the meta tags. They're doing the things that need to optimize the content so that we're showing up high in the Google search results, okay? It's essentially been around for the last 20 years or so in an effort to game mainly Google. Bing is a little bit easier. It's not quite as complex of an algorithm. And there's always been this sort of cat and mouse game, right, where people figure out how to trick the system, and then Google will release an update that makes that trick harder to do, so people come up with other ways to trick things. But a lot of it is just using your proper terms, making sure that your content is a certain way, making sure that your backlinks are coming from authoritative sources. And in recent years, not exactly SEO, but certainly good for placement, you've seen a lot more pay-to-play. You go to a regular traditional Google search result these days, and the sponsored ads can take you over. This is not the same as going viral, okay? Trying to unlock the magic code that puts you at the top of the hit, that's a mystery unknown to us. That world that we've been living in, which has been relatively comfortable, we know the rules of the game, is disappearing, right? Zero-click search is on the rise. And search is becoming focused on providing answers, not on guiding questions, all right? This was as of last spring. 86% Google search with AI overviews using its Gemini package is 86% of searches are returning with AI elements, and 60% of the searches have no-click results, okay? So this means they're not even going to your website anymore. People are just seeking answers. This is how my wife cooks. I will hear her in the evening whenever there's a question for cooking. She just asks her phone, what should I do? And the phone tells her something, and she does it. And the meals seem okay. I've learned a couple things about ingredient substitution, and she's moving along. The kids seem to like it too. They're engaging it, and these are going to be their memories of cooking with mom when they were growing up. Very different from my memories of cooking with my mom. So what's the difference? In a world where when people are seeking an answer, that answer is no longer directing them to your website and your content. It's now just simply giving an answer, right? Right? We used to, I mean, we've been worshiping the Google God for about 2 decades now, right? The goal has been to be on that first page of the search because that means that your site is the one that's giving the answer, right? We want people going to the National Milk Producers Federation, not Vegan News, for their opinions of dairy. Now, the battlefront has changed, okay? Google or Bing or whoever has decided that actually we don't want to be the intermediary to the website anymore. We're not helping people search to get to you. We're going to take what you do, use our large language models to figure out what we like, and we're just going to give the answer. And we'll cite it. We'll put a little link on the side. If somebody wants to learn more, they can click on your link, but 80% of the time, they're not going to do that. They're just going to read what we wrote and accept it as truth. That changes things in a pretty profound way. So SEO, what's it about? Geared toward improving your website's visibility on search engines. Do it right, your site climbs to the top. So keywords, right? You got to have the right keywords. You got to have the right tags so that it shows up. You got to have your backlinks. You have your sites linking to you. You want your content to be well written. And you also, is your site fast? Is it mobile friendly, right? Are people going to be able to click on it easily? Google does not want people going to the site that's at the top of its result and then taking forever to download the page. That's not a good experience and it reflects poorly on the search engine. So for the last 10 years, optimization for mobile has been a very big deal. Again, do you have to be so optimized for mobile if no one's going to click on your site at all? GEO is concerned with content that the search tools can synthesize into answers, okay? Be the answer is now the goal. So for that, you need some different things. And again, there's a big Venn diagram between SEO and GEO. A lot of the same things can be cross-applied. But again, as you are trying to get your truth into the answer, which is now the goal, you have to be thinking of some different things. Clear language, okay? You need to have writing that AI can easily interpret, right? Explain it to me like I'm a kindergartner. That's a good start. Structure. We like headings. We like lists. We like bullet points. There were several points during this book as I was reading through, and I was reading Matt Britton's thesis. Matt Britton is the same age as me. I recognize his type. I've never met him. He came up with an idea in the 90s. Before it failed, he sold it to a big company. Then he started another company. And before that company failed, he sold it to a big company. He's now on his third iteration of being bought out, which gives you a lot of insight. But as I read this, I'm like, okay, how much of this book is being written by him? And how much of it sounds like, can you guys pick out Perplexity or ChatGPT or AI writing? How many of you feel confident that you can tell whether something's been written by AI or not? Why are you confident? What makes you think you can pick it out? I would agree. When I first started punching things into ChatGPT 2 years ago, one of the first things I did was tell me a little bit about Alan Bjerga. And it gave me 200 words, and there were 5 fact errors. I did not grow up in North Dakota. I did not win that journalism award, although I would have really liked to. I was not teaching at American University. I was teaching at Georgetown. It's just stuff was coming up. But I did it again a couple months ago, and it gave me 500 words, and it was all spot on. It's getting better. But it still has that difference in voice. I believe at NMPF I have a staff of 5 people, and I can tell who wrote what without knowing who submitted it, right? Once you reach a certain level of writing proficiency, you have a voice. Now, my voice has always over-relied on M-dashes, so in that sense, I'm very copacetic with the large language models. I think in M-dashes. Sometimes those M-dashes are like 300 words between the two of them, but they do come back to the point. But you can tell people who back into their phrases, and you can tell people who are super direct to the point where they almost come as rude. And ChatGPT is a voice, but it's the ChatGPT voice, right? Except, as I think you've been talking about in other seminars, you can specify voices. You can change voices. A couple weeks ago, in this meeting with Ketchum, we had a persona made. It was a Maha Mom. They basically took a bunch of influencers and websites and things that they identified as part of the Maha movement, and they created a Maha Mom voice. And the idea is that when we do press releases that might be of interest to that community, we can run it through Maha Mom. Maha Mom will give a critique of the language and talk about how we can word things differently to appeal to their community. We start talking about lived experience and, respect for anecdotal knowledge and all sorts of these things. And it was fascinating because I was sitting in this room and there were dairy communicators who were getting mad at Maha Mom. But, what about that? Well, it doesn't matter. This is Maha Mom, okay? This is going to affect how we write press releases, okay? And that's going to affect messaging moving forward. But we need clear language, okay? Structure, heading, lists, bullet points. The return of the frequently asked questions, okay? How many of you have websites with fact pages? Well, you need them because right now the large language models love it. They love little single paragraphs with bullet points and subheadings and things that look like how they present things. It makes it very easy for them to cite you and aggregate the knowledge that you've put together, okay? And then authority, accurate, high-quality, source-based info. There's a belief out there that if you do a post and you get a lot of likes for it and it goes viral on like Twitter or TikTok or whatever, that's really going to help you. The current formula for Gemini, which is the large language model used by Google, social media accounts for 11% of the evaluative content, and most of it is the quality of the sources. Now, what are the high quality sources? Reddit is considered pretty high right now. Part of that is because they're signing agreements, okay? I'm going to start taking the Financial Times a little more seriously when I get media calls from them because they have an agreement in terms of providing content. But indeed, legacy media, right, those places whose phone calls I don't care about so much, do get a high priority in terms of the large language models in terms of finding credible answers. Okay, government agencies have high GEO scores, which is frightening when you think about some of the stuff that is coming, especially out of FDA and HHS these days. And how will that affect their GEO scores, right? SEO scores were one thing. They were based on certain factors. GEO scores are based on something else. The folks dealing with the large language models are coming up with the formulas to figure out how much relative weight we should give for things. They hopefully are decent human beings, but we really don't know. What we do know is that everyone in this room, in all likelihood, works for someone that has a pretty credible score, especially within agriculture. And this is good stuff, okay? You are the high-quality, accurate information. People will link to your stories, okay? If there is a high-quality source that is citing you, please, make sure that they have the backlink. Make sure that they have the evaluation. Type questions into ChatGPT, see what sites come up for the answer, and ask yourself, how can I be that site? How can I give that answer? Okay? This is what GEO is about. So the promise of this, it's based on authority, okay? Credibility of source. It provides answers, and it sets the discourse, right? While consumers say they're skeptical of AI answers, it's still what they see, right? And we're more swayed by things that we see, even if we don't think we believe them. There's still a corner of real estate in our brain that thing has just occupied. That's the glory of misinformation campaigns. But it's also the glory of giving credible information as well. And for those of you who who wonder if, well, maybe this is all something that's just going to collapse, it's been overhyped, it goes away, you can see reasons for skepticism, the hallucinations, the fact errors I talked about, the fact that the voice sounds different. I'm struck by a quote from Bill Gates in his book, The Road Ahead, that came back in 1996. He said something then that I think has held true, as I think through my entire professional life this has held. He said, people overestimate how different things will be in 2 years. They underestimate how different things will be in 10 years. I think of it as the flying car question, where I've been spending my whole life waiting for the flying cars. Right? Life hasn't changed much. I'm still waiting for my flying car. Except the phones and the death of legacy media and screen addiction for kids. In 10 years, the world is going to be almost recognizable from today. 2 years, we're probably still moving along where we can be. AI, however, will say because it helps solve problems. I present to you this gopher. Okay, this gopher was caught with the assistance of artificial intelligence. This is from my backyard. My cucumber crops were being devastated. I didn't know what to do. Was this going to be the second straight year of a failed harvest? They seemed to be liking the tomatoes, and unlike last year, they were going after the beans too. My wife was being defeatist. I refused to stand by. I went to Home Depot, I bought a trap for $75, and I went into business. My next-door neighbors were being devastated as well. They were all going to go in to hire a professional trapping service. I said, whatever, I can figure this out myself. My dad used to trap gophers when I was a kid. If my dad did it, I could do it. But my dad never taught me how to trap a gopher. So what did I do? I started asking questions to ChatGPT. To effectively trap a gopher, gophers use carrots. Okay, they'll also take sweet potatoes, but when I buy a sweet potato, they're more expensive. Okay, I want to use carrots because I buy a bag of carrots, they're cheap. Cut them into several pieces, leave a few of them outside the cage, kind of do the trail of breadcrumbs thing. They'll eat the ones outside the cage at first, but as the cage sits there, they'll slowly move in, okay? When you trap them, drive them at least 10 miles away, and then when you bring the cage back, don't clean it. They will be attracted by other gopher scents, okay? In the month of June, I trapped 4 gophers, and neither my yard or my neighbor's yards have had any problems since. I'm a hero in my neighborhood. 100% knowledge given by ChatGPT. I did not ask the old guy down the street. I did not consult with the fur trapping collective. I didn't even go to a website to write someone an email who seemed to be doing something. I didn't go into a chat group. I just asked a bunch of questions, learned how to trap a gopher, and the garden is saved. And people will apply the exact same thing to any question that they have about knowledge and information. You have to be the person recommending the carrots. And I want to thank the website that was good enough to recommend the carrots, because if someone had been disinforming me, I would have no crop this year. The big 3 of GEO communication. So you're optimizing your content, writing with depth and context. This, to me, is the most exciting thing, the rebirth of long-form writing. I'm going to date myself. The only presidential campaign I ever followed as a journalist was in 2004, which I will maintain will be the last time that we ever see 2 sets of white guys go against each other for the White House between the Republicans and the Democrats. That was the last time. It was Bush Cheney against Kerry Edwards. I was following the campaign, but because I was younger, they had me do something different called a blog. Okay, we're going to see how the newspaper company was doing with its blogs. I had the most read blog of Knight Ridder newspapers in the 2004 presidential campaign. Thank you. That's not on my Wikipedia page. But we had this blogging expert, and he told me that my pieces were too long. I was writing 300, 500 word posts, and I really needed to be going more frequently with smaller content. So I did that. My readership actually declined. I was a long-form guy. I've always been a long-form guy. You read the Dairy Defined Thought Leader series on nnpf.org, which obviously you should do for all of your best information about milk and the truth. I've always written longer pieces, 300, 500, 600, 800 words. A graphic cuts it down a little bit. This is going to get me to my retirement, okay? I'm going to spend the rest of my career training my AI master. They like depth, facts and citations, clear conversational language, and the return of the FAQ. Now, one thing I'm doing is I'm breaking things up more into bullets. I'm using more subheadings. I'm letting the large language model know I'm answering this. But that's cosmetic. What I'm offering is greater depth. And there's an opportunity for greater depth in this language. Developing content, okay? If you're looking in terms of communications and looking at your page, figure out your weaknesses and shore them up. Ask some questions, see who's providing the answers. Okay, why not you? If you're working in communications, what are some areas that you care a lot, and you punch in your questions to the large language model, and the websites are your competition or your opponent? If you're working for a journalism organization and you want to know, what is being cited for X, Y, and Z, and you're not it, well, maybe that deals with your content decisions in terms of some of the stuff that you might want to cover that's of interest. And this is different than going for clicks. This is building an archive that is going to have a long shelf life, because this stuff isn't instantaneous. It lives on your site. And even if it's not the most visited page on your site, it's there. And the crawl is scooping things up. And people will be asking some question about something that is very important to what you are writing and something that is very important to your readers in your industry. And it's not the breaking news story that they're necessarily going to pull from. It's the evergreen. It's the explainer. There's a place for it. And actually a pretty exciting place in terms of the effectiveness of your language and what you're doing, okay? Ask some questions, see who's providing the answer, and don't pretend you invented something, okay? Links are fine. Links to the sites that you see showing up in the answers are even better, because they're doing something right. And if you can't beat them, join them. That's a way to build. Somehow, if someone is seeing them as very credible, and connecting with them builds your credibility too, okay? Connect with winners. That's what I'm talking about. If a top source published you, publish back. Focus on sites the LLMs are focusing on. YouTube, Reddit. Quora is a really good one. If you've ever decided to make yourself an expert and just start answering Quora questions, sometimes those things will just sit forever. The large language model will soak it up. And again, you are the answer. Rather than necessarily focusing on your own site, focus on your own message. Figure out what sites are carrying those messages and get on those sites. That's a different approach to publishing and communications. But what if it's hallucination? Fact errors that sound truthy are plaguing AI, but that seems to be going down. Is the system being gamed? Of course it is. How many people follow the saga of Grok? Elon Musk's large language model, which is attempting to basically reflect his view of the world. Remember, once again, telling it like it is what reflects your own biases. Every time he does this, it starts spewing out hateful anti-Jew, pro-Nazi rhetoric, which, if you were Elon, could prompt a look in the mirror. But, I think Elon only looks in the mirror to check out his latest jaw surgery. We may not have much hope there. But again, even if it's not being gamed, again, elements of bias, right? And what if the winner is your rival? So at National Milk Producers Federation, the dairy checkoff is the most well-funded of all of the agricultural checkoffs. So they throw a bunch of money to catch them, and they do big analyses of this stuff. At NMPF, we're much smaller and more nimble. We did a similar project on putting in search terms and figuring out how large language models are portraying us. We talked to the checkoff in advance, both for best practices and to sort of not, reinvent the wheel and trot on new ground. So we took a look a lot of the issue of plant-based beverage terms for dairy. That's kind of one of our organization's stock and trade issues, right? The checkoff doesn't talk about it because it runs into disparagement issues. We're a lobbying organization. We can disparage all we want, so I spend a lot of time going against the almond beverage imposters, right? It's a lot of fun. And what I found was in our debate on this issue, the large language models were, from my perspective, pretty fair. They pointed out the nutritional differences with dairy, which is the heart of our argument. They pointed out that milk has a unique nutritional package that plant-based beverages often don't match. What was interesting was they were inaccurate in terms of their discussions of market share and how plant-based beverages were gaining a lot of ground on the strength of Gen Z, which was true in 21 and 22, but not so much now. Plant-based beverage sales actually peaked in the United States in 2021, but the models haven't caught up yet. So what am I working on right now? Graphics and columns and social media messages and pieces that update the information. I'm trying to get into the large language models. The other thing that we found was that in a lot of the answers were being provided by the International Dairy Foods Association. That's my competitor. My rival is getting all of the ink. The question becomes, how much do I care? I don't know. Is it about the message, or is it about, the member rivalry? I will say that next month, IDFA and us are going to be doing our first ever joint podcast, leveraging forces in our GEO scores to talk with our respective CEOs and see if maybe we can bump up some scores a little bit. So what to do, okay? Well, there on the side is a CEO's Corner. That's a thought leadership series that we work on that you may notice the key bullet points that wouldn't have existed a few months earlier, okay? Write well and write accurately, okay? All the right links, truth is, truth brings, okay? I'm aging myself again. I tell my daughters, they're 8 and 10, that, back when I was young, they had bands that mattered, like Blink 182. High quality citations, targeted social media amplification, right? I mean, social media still helps. It's still part of the equation. None of this stuff ever goes away, right? I mean, everything is still part of the answer. You never say don't do anything, but it's a matter of effectiveness. I mean, again, this guy wrote a physical book, all right? Nothing goes away. But you have to take a look at, your own resources and where you really want to put your eggs in what baskets. Following on that, SEO's death can be exaggerated, right? It's not going away. My organization is looking at doing a major web upgrade next year, okay? What does that mean in the age of GEO versus SEO? It means our landing pages are going to have we're going to be doing a lot of frequently asked questions. We're going to be doing a lot of evergreen content. We're going to be doing a lot of just basic Dairy 101 educational stuff, linking to high-quality studies and surveys. We're not going to put as much into the latest bell whistle multimedia spirit of the age stuff as we would have back in the 20-teens or the 20-aughts. The internal combustion engine hasn't changed a lot in the last 50 years. I mean, we're not necessarily focusing our resources on that anymore. We want something with a little more lasting presence. As long as we have a cool homepage, right? People are still looking at your storefront window. Your members still have your page bookmarked. We still need to make sure that when they come into our house that it looks nice and clean. But the fact is, a lot of where our influence is going to come from is people who never walk into our house. They're asking a question, they're getting an answer, and hopefully it's coming from us, but we don't control that like we used to. With this, could good writing make a comeback? Yes. Longer form equals greater depth and preferred source. Maybe, but what about the list? See, everything gets overdone, and I have been going to presentations where people are talking about turning everything into a listicle. I guarantee you the large language models will figure this out very soon, and it's going to be the same as was done in SEO. They're going to catch on, and they're going to start degrading and devaluing things, and all that effort will be going for naught. So you need a hybrid approach to writing an organization. To me, it's still about the quality of content and the writing and the message. It's still about the story. Despite the fragmentation of media and truth, effective messaging is still possible. It still relies on fundamental principles of credibility, relatability, and empathy, which will serve you well in GEO. And it's important to do because, especially in this environment, if you don't tell your story, someone else is going to. And it is harder to persuade people and break through their realities, but you can get the straight story to them in the way that they choose to consume it. And again, they get to choose, not us. So, in sum, SEO, mantra. GEO, pithy soundbite. This is my haiku. All right? That is how I would put it in sum. Big thoughts, okay? What we're really trying to do is train the trainers, okay? We have these big, large language models that do all sorts of interesting things. Print is a little ahead of video, and I don't know as much about video. We're not as far along on that with our own site. It's getting there. Embracing the GEO era means shaping the future, right? Understanding how people will consume information and positioning properly will shape tomorrow's literal understanding of reality and of agriculture, and whether cows are good things, and whether a seed oil will kill you, and whether what an ultra-processed food even is, okay? We're preventing dystopia here, right? Media literacy is no longer enough because media is just a feeder for answers. It's information literacy. It's understanding how these models work and knowing what grains of salt you need to take them with. It's not just the bias of the outlet, it's which biases and perspectives get filtered into the synthesis, which then becomes truth. And in the end, everyone's just trying to make sense of it all. Every presentation I have given this year ends with this picture. I've probably shown this picture a half dozen times. One person has gotten it right this year. Is there a number two? What's this a picture of? People. Martin Luther. Congratulations. What's he doing? He is presenting before the Diet of Worms in 1521, okay? This is where the Catholic Church brought him to heel and said, okay, we don't like the stuff that you're writing. We need you to recant or bad things could happen to you. I was just reading recently, and in 1501, Pope Alexander VI, who was the Pope at the time, talked about the invention of the printing press. And he said that the printing press would lead to chaos upon the land because people would start expressing their own thoughts and they would start just independently communicating information, and there would be no ecclesiastical authority like the church to tell people what was true and what was not. And he predicted that chaos would result. And was he wrong? He was not wrong. Within 2 decades, Luther came around, and the only difference between Martin Luther and a guy a century earlier named Jan Hus, who was burned at the stake as a heretic, was he had the printing press. The printing press in that day, by the way, was very much analogous to social media is right now. There was no intellectual property. Martin Luther wrote all the bestsellers of the first half of the 16th century. He didn't get paid a dime for it, but the publishers loved putting it out. And he'd write a pamphlet, and then one of his opponents would write a pamphlet, and they would flame each other. Martin Luther got more and more into it in his later years, said some horrible things about Jews that the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America had to apologize for 500 years ago after Hitler used it as a basis of Nazism. This stuff gets really complex, okay? It was a communications revolution, all right? It led to 100 years of the bloodiest warfare that Europe has ever seen as people dealt with a communications revolution. We're in the middle of one right now, another one, and we're in some pretty contentious times. And so the responsibility that we all have here is pretty weighty when you think about it. I mean, we're working for our publications, we're working for our organizations, we're trying to get people to understand things that there are a lot of disincentives for things to understand. But we can be intelligent about it, and we can understand what the trainers are doing, and we can try to train them ourselves. It's the little pebble that we can have to contribute to the sea of knowledge and prevent bloodshed, okay? So when you're moving forth, here's my quote here. Be a sinner and let your sins be strong, okay? If you're going to go forth boldly, just go for it. Own it. But let your trust in Christ be stronger and rejoice in Christ, who is the victor over sin, death, and the world. Keep plugging away. Everyone in this room is doing good stuff. Everyone is representing a perspective that needs to be heard. Everyone is doing something that helps advance knowledge and gives consumer understanding and is working forward with good faith. This is a challenging time. We have a few minutes for questions. Keep the faith. Thank you. I have no idea what time it is. I just start talking. 11:18? Okay. I was told that we can all leave for lunch early if we need to, but I did want some ample time for questions and discussion. Yes? Or SEO, you mean? Yeah, the summary, that's what, generative engine optimization. Okay, generative, right? It's generating things, right? Search engine, Google was search. Bing was search. Yahoo was search. You type in the query, they give you a bunch of sites, you're searching, okay? We think, you just asked a question, we think the answer you want is there. And the way that Google made its reputation was it was better at finding that thing that was there than anyone else. Now, the next step is saying, okay, you have that question. We're not going to point you to answers. We're just going to answer it for you. That's generating something rather than just searching. That's the key difference between the terms, and it has a profound implication because it's giving you that answer. And you know how there's that little link on the side? Well, that's where it is. That's the citation. If you want to click on that link and learn more, you can. But 60% of the time, people don't. That's a no-click answer. Search is down. Our website traffic is down. People are asking questions about dairy, and they aren't coming to us anymore. They might be coming to an answer that we generated or that Vegan News generated. I've done some checks on some of our most read pieces of content, and I do see that it is showing up. Our content is showing up in the sides, but it's a battle, and that's the battle to try to get in there. And I wish I could just give you the answer. I'm sure if I had an AI product that I wanted you to spend money on, I would tell you that that was the answer. Can you tell I've gotten cynical about some of these things? I'm sorry if my limited knowledge is a disappointment to you all, but I'm not trying to claim to know more than I do. Yes? What do you mean by assuming they're taking our information and synthesizing it? Yeah. So one thing to note, so Google is using Gemini. That's their large language model, and it gives you that site, you know. And Bing, right, which ChatGPT was their whole thing, which for a brief moment there, it looked like Bing was going to become the search engine, right? Finally, they found a way to kill Google, and then Google just comes in with Gemini. You're right. It's not as transparent, right? And it's harder to find out if you're the answer. If you have the answer, the answer to that just becomes: are you happy with what ChatGPT is saying? Right? If you're happy, then you shouldn't care so much, right? But if you're not happy, you got to figure out what might get you in. And yes, it is a less transparent process. Back. That back. Then the next back. We got two back. No. Go. I'm just distinguishing between the backs. Yes. You back. So I've heard Wikipedia as well. It is not something that has been coming up in the stuff that I've been looking at. That could well be wrong. It could depend on the large language model. You know, Wikipedia is free, and they're not entering into partnership agreements. And Wikipedia, in a way, I mean, all of that stuff is linked too. So it is often, Wikipedia kind of does the same thing in its own way, and it's like with my college students, you know, I'm okay with you using Wikipedia as a research point, but I don't ever want you citing Wikipedia. You want to go to Wikipedia, find the source that they're citing, look it up as original source material, and cite that. I can live with that. It's the same thing. I have not heard as much about Wikipedia, but I could be totally wrong. I was surprised by Reddit. But yeah, it's where the kids are these days. Other back.
So the question I have is how do we measure all of this, right? All of us in this room probably have, depending on our roles, we have to take what we do and turn it into something that we can take to our bosses and say, look at all these great numbers. With the clicks going away, with the legacy media, you know, we're not getting all of this ad equivalency dollars from the legacy groups. How do you quantify having strong GEO to a board?
Well, first of all, there would be two things that you would do. One is you can find out your GEO score, okay? And I don't know specifically the mechanics of how to do that. We have a web vendor called DuPont Creative. We worked with them very well. They say that we have a high score. News organizations tend to have the highest scores. Government agencies also have very high scores. Trade associations like mine that aren't weird are kind of in the next tier, but also with high scores. And then when you get into like the blogger influencer realm, it starts getting pretty subjective, you know. You start looking into credentials, and at a certain point it gets to be a little bit of a black box. So that's one thing, is you literally can find out your score. Okay, and you can raise that score often through like the way that you use backlinks and how you cite other organizations, right? If you start going through stuff and start, you know, linking to the National Institutes of Health or other highly rated things, that can help you. So that's one part of it. And then the other part is, and again, this is all anecdotal, go into incognito mode, you know, set yourself at a computer that, you know, hasn't been damaged by your fingerprints. Because again, you know, if you do this stuff as you, one thing that's interesting is that if I search for things about dairy, these large language models tend to tell me more of what I want to hear. It's all so insanely individually tailored based on the digital fingerprint that you are leaving. That's why when we were doing our own stuff, greatest intern project ever. I mean, we're now bringing our intern on part-time in the fall because the CEO was so impressed with her AI project. You know, incognito window, browser that hadn't been used, no digital fingerprint, punch in some questions on stuff that you'd written a lot about, and something that you knew has done fairly well in terms of engagement online. I was very thrilled. For whatever reason, the most clicked on piece of original content on nmpf.org since our last full revamp on the web in 2019 was a column that I wrote under heavy sedation. I mean, the Novocaine was wearing off as I wrote this darn thing. It was about Country Crock plant-based butter. And I just ripped into them, okay, because it's not butter and it's a failing project and they're taking our health halo and FDA should do something and get off my lawn. For whatever reason, that for the next 5 years, that was one of our top 10 read pieces of content. Every week, it always showed up. I'm like, really? That thing is still there? So I went into ChatGPT and I went into, you know, Gemini and I looked through stuff and gosh darn it, if I asked, is Country Crock butter? That came up. Yay. That shows the board. We're showing up in AI queries in areas where we have put in some effort. Okay, it's anecdotal, but it shows impact. It also shows that you're on top of this AI thingy, and all the boards. We need to know things about AI. There, we did something. Yes. Sure. Well, that gets into intellectual property things, right? Like the New York Times is a really good example of that, right? I mean, they're like, this is our IP. Actions have consequences. During the early days of mad cow in dairy cattle, which, by the way, is very close to being eradicated. Okay, everybody should be writing about that, right? You never care when it gets eradicated. You only care when it affects the milk. I get it. We had internal conversations because traditional PR teaching would be we wanted to win the battle of the terms, and so we're not going to call it mad cow. Sorry, bird flu. We're not going to call it bird flu. Okay, we don't want all the bird flu stuff. It sounds unsafe. It's HPAI in dairy cattle, right? Well, great. So when people ask questions into ChatGPT about bird flu, what organization has just guaranteed that they will never be in any of the responses to questions about that? And that's SEO as well as GEO, right? So we say bird flu. We started saying bird flu because that's what we need to do to get in. As a media organization, you have a different set of rules, and I appreciate the standing up for the intellectual property of journalists and your own premium content. It is very noble. So were the Polish cavalry who charged on horseback against the Nazis. Right. But, what was also inevitable was Napster. Remember Napster? Right? And people got mad at the recording industry for suing grandmothers in Brainerd, Minnesota for downloading stuff on the internet, but at least they created an expectation that the stuff is not free. And at least we do have streaming models now that are not necessarily the best for recording artists, but there is an expectation that you can pay for music. News organizations didn't do that for many, many years, and guess what happened? Now they're all putting up stuff behind paywalls, which then people just ignore them and go to other places for information. So I'm glad that it's harder to get to the Wall Street Journal. I'll just listen to Joe Rogan for a few hours. There, I help the public discourse. I'm ranting. Yes, Sarah. So it depends on the large language model and the weight that they give to social media. One of the banes, well, not one of the challenges is that there is a perception out there, and this goes back to the early SEO days. When you go back to if you really want to geek into this stuff, like the history of SEO, okay? In the early days, the main principle of SEO was if people are talking about it, it must be important. So, lots of comments, lots of shares, lots of reprints, that's what got you up. And there's still a feeling that that's how it works. And it's not wrong, but the percentages may not be as high as you think. I think ChatGPT social is 11% of the algorithm. In Gemini, it's 9%. So it helps, but it's not determinative. And so that leads to the question of, okay, we want this to get, and the reason is because it gets gamed so much, and people you've all done it. You've seen you've seen those people on Instagram who have 100,000 followers, and if you start looking at who the followers are, you're wondering if they actually exist. It plagues social media, and so for that reason, the large language models tend to be skeptical. But that doesn't mean it's not weight at all. Everything is just sort of in proportion. We do paid social, but when we do that, it's not because of large language models. It's because we actually are trying to get that marginal boost because it's our big issue, and maybe it'll draw some more people to our call to action. But I don't emphasize it greatly. What I have found for social media is moving more from a broad base, oh, look at all those likes and shares, to the I'm going to tag Stephen Miller and make sure his account sees what I'm saying about immigration. And I'm getting into being a policy geek, but our government is being run by a bunch of Twitter addicts right now. And honestly, if you want to get your message to them, you say, we are farmers and this is what we think. And it does get response. But that's my social media strategy. It's not about wide reach anymore. It's about literally targeting individual people, which, by the way, has taken a lot of pressure off of press releases, because I, several years ago, got sick of sending out press releases with audiences of 2 people. And we don't do that anymore, thank God. Yes?
What are kind of your thoughts on SEO headlines? I've used to work in a couple of different news organizations, and we go around, we brought our main headline, and then we brought different SEO headlines, and we currently when sometimes they publish a couple of different.
Sure. I write headlines. I just write headlines. I've been writing headlines since the 20th century. I would say, here's what I would say, though, in a GEO world. If it's a headline that answers a question, that helps you with large language models, more so than making sure that you got the keyword in there. I mean, often they're one and the same thing, right? But in the end, an informative headline that declaratively says a thing is going to be better than just trying to cram the 5 terms into it, which I thought led to a lot of really bad writing. But in the end, I still write headlines. That's just it. What drives me nuts is web headlines now, that because the space is endless, so is the headline. I love the discipline of having to get everything into 36 characters. It led to great words like irked. Nobody ever gets irked in conversation, but in headlines, they're irked all the time. After we're done, if other people have other great examples of very short words that only exist in headlines, I'll totally geek out with you. Yes? Sure. Oh, interesting. Well, again, what is your audience and what is your purpose? So the Dairy Define column is my snarkiness run wild, and it gets hits. It's the best read content that we get. Why? Because it gets shared. It gets posted on social media. People take snippets and they move it along. When we're looking at GEO and large language models, that is disproportionately not picked up. What they like is our issues pages, where we do bullet point rundowns of our positions on raw milk. Boy, that's exciting to read. But that's what the language models ask, because people are not asking, give me a really witty article about how awful raw milk is, right? Is raw milk safe? And one answers the question better than the other. The other one gets more hits. And I would also say can be helped in the large language model, but that snarkiness now better be kept in with a nice heap and dose of facts and bullet points that the large language model likes more. And that has affected my writing. The beautiful thing is that, what might have been 500 words of snark is now 700 words of snark and information. The large language model likes that, and it just allows me to show how brilliant I am for 200 more words. What could be better than that? Humanity. Let's not let it go.
Other.
Yes. Right. Mm-hmm. I would say that what you would, in the current iteration of GEO, you keep all the fluffiness, and you include like a subhead with a expository section that is kind of a little more dry and fact-based, and then you go back to being fluffy. I mean, we can't deal with the world of ChatGPT by starting to sound like ChatGPT ourselves, please. You know, let's keep some sort of a soul and authenticity. I would argue that our humanity is our selling point. But we live in a world where, to be effective messengers, we are feeding large language models in a way that we weren't before. I suppose my dairy-defined snarky columns would do better in SEO than in GEO, right? Because once again, you know, the number of clicks matters more so in that environment. But I'm still going to do it, yeah. Mm-hmm. GEO likes transcripts. That's really the only experience I have personally with dialogue, is when we do our podcast, we'll print a transcript. Other than that, that's not really an area where I've had a lot of expertise. And it's tough for me to tell because, frankly, the podcasts that do better are the ones that have the better dialogue. So it's kind of a shaping, right? I haven't done a podcast that's been really dull and dry that the large language models love, but the people didn't listen to. They kind of go the same. Our best performing podcast this year was with Lena Teicholz, author of The Big Fat Surprise. And she's, you know, all on the saturated fat is good for you bandwagon, which appears to have some adherence in the administration. It made for a pretty good podcast. You know, she took USDA completely to task, which in normal times an advocacy organization would probably not publish. But of course, she's talking about that USDA, not the golden USDA that's going to send everybody to Salt Lake City. You know, different times. That one did very well, but it also got a lot of listens, and it's hard for me to tease it out. But I've heard the same thing about dialogue. It's just not an area that we've been doing a lot with due to the nature of what we publish. Yeah. Yes. Right. So when you're doing any research, best practice is to ask every question as a positive and a negative, right? And see how the information source changes. When we did our little project, it was actually heartening. You know, I have to go back to the actual documents in it, but basically when you asked it in a dairy-biased way versus a plant-based biased way, you got similar quality sources that still had similar answers. Now, again, we were setting ourselves as a mythical neutral source. I don't know how that comes up if you've been steeped in, you know, the food babe for the last 4 years. But the large language models, and we were working specifically with ChatGPT. I actually currently have our intern right now working on Gemini and Perplexity. So more to come on that. You're all holding up pretty well. Thank you for asking all of these questions. Yes, we have more. Mm-hmm.
They may have understood SEO at some point in time for the embedded workers,
Mm-hmm.
but introducing GEO to them may be confusing. So how do you approach that with folks that are essentially approving the process that's
Sure.
going on that they can grasp?
I mean, again, you know, SEO is trying to get your content to the top of a search page. Everybody has searched by now, okay? The search engines are now, they're no longer recommending your page. They're just looking at a bunch of pages and taking an answer and bypassing the pages altogether. The goal of SEO is to be the answer. So we're working to be the answer. And the longer a bit people ask questions and generate answers, the easier that's going to be to understand. Right? My father finally understands the internet. He was the last officer on the Minnesota Highway Patrol to get an email address. He is 78 years old, and he now finally is like searching for stuff. I wish he understood how to not download viruses. But alas, we all end up falling behind the technologies that come after us. I'm trying to keep up as best I can. I have too much career left to just decide to live in the year that I picked and force everyone else to live in it with me. I've seen people who do that, and things tend not to end well for them. We have to stay. He who is not busy being born is busy dying. Okay. That's a great final thought, but I have time for a couple other questions if you move along. Anything else before we head off to our lunch? Well, I really appreciate the conversation. Info@nmpf.org goes to our entire communications team, including me. Feel free to reach out with any questions about stuff. We're all trying to figure all this stuff out. I have a few anecdotal lessons, a little bit of experience from some seminars and some readings, and 25 years of experience with evolution and all of this stuff. 25 years is the last time I was in Rogers, Arkansas. And I just want to thank Katie again for giving reason for all the work that she does with the organizers of this conference in terms of making it a wonderful trip back. It was great to have a chance to interact with all of you and hear questions and help us all figure this all out together. So thank you.